April 18, 1945, Edwards Airfield, California. The desert wind carried a low hum that morning, rising and falling like the breath of something vast and mechanical beneath the earth. The war in Europe was drawing to its bloody end, but here, in the dust and sunlight of the Mojave, another kind of battle was underway. One fought not with rifles or tanks, but with propellers, engines, and secrets. Inside Hangar 12, a space so classified that even the guards outside weren't told its true purpose, stood an aircraft unlike any that had ever flown under an American flag. Its body shimmered under the lights, silver, almost ghostly. Engineers whispered its codename, Silver Ghost. Officially, it didn't exist. Not on records, not in any report, and not in the eyes of the enemy. To the few who worked on it, it was more than a plane, it was a miracle stitched together from the ruins of two worlds. Its wings stretched longer than a P-38 Lightning, yet it was slimmer than a B-17. Every rivet gleamed with promise and danger. Some said it could outrun its own shadow. Others said it was cursed. But on this April morning, one man was about to find out which was true. Captain Raymond Ellis, 31 years old, stood beside the aircraft, helmet in hand, his reflection bending across the polished fuselage. He wasn't just a pilot, he was a believer, in speed, in innovation, in the strange union of man and machine. Around him, the crew moved in silence, tightening bolts, checking gauges, pretending not to notice that this flight wasn't listed on any schedule. They called it a performance test. But everyone knew what it really was, a race against time. The Soviets were already advancing in Europe, seizing what was left of German technology. The British had their own jet prototypes, and whispers from the Pacific spoke of Japanese scientists working on rocket-assisted aircraft. America needed to prove it could go faster, much faster. Ellis climbed into the cockpit, feeling the cool metal under his gloves. He didn't need to be told that this plane was dangerous. He could sense it in the way the engines growled even before ignition, as if they wanted to break free of the ground. For radial engines sat beneath the wings, their propellers gleaming like knives. But what no one outside this hangar knew, not even most of the crew, was that hidden deep within the fuselage was a fifth power source. Something the engineers refused to discuss. Something they called the heart of the ghost. When the hangar doors opened, the morning sunlight spilled across the aircraft's nose, revealing faint stencils. U.S. Army markings hastily painted over a dull patch of gray metal. Ellis glanced at them, knowing they were fake. This plane didn't belong to any division. It belonged to history, if it survived. Ground control crackled through his headset. Silver 1, you are clear for taxi. Maintain altitude test parameters and keep her below 450. Repeat, below 450. Ellis smirked. They'd told him the same thing last time. He'd kept it below 450 barely. But not today. Today, he wasn't here to obey. He was here to see what no pilot had seen before, what the sky looked like beyond the limits of propeller flight. As the engines roared to life, the ground shook. Dust and sand whipped across the airfield, blinding the men who watched from behind glass. The bomber rolled forward, slow at first, then faster, its tires kicking up twin trails of dirt. When it lifted off, the desert fell silent. For a moment, there was only the sound of power cutting through thin air. High above the Mojave, Ellis felt the weight lift from his chest. The Silver Ghost handled unlike any bomber he'd flown. It was smooth, responsive, almost alive. He pushed the throttle forward, feeling the vibration in his bones. 390 miles per hour, 420. The dial trembled. The engines screamed like wild beasts straining at their chains. Still, he pushed harder. Down below, technicians watched in disbelief as the radar readings climbed. 440, 470, then 490. The readings stuttered, the instruments unable to keep up. At that moment, the radio crackled violently. Static. Then nothing. Silver 1, do you copy? Silver 1, respond. No answer. Just the empty hiss of static. The blip on the radar began to move erratically, jumping, fading, then vanishing altogether. 2 minutes passed. Then 10. The desert crew stared at the empty horizon. Somewhere above, a bomber had crossed a line in the sky that no one had ever crossed, and disappeared doing it. If you're just joining us, this story comes from the shadowy edge of World War II history, where facts met secrets and pilots touched the impossible. This is WWII Frontline Legends. Before we go deeper into the mystery of the Silver Ghost, make sure you subscribe and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We read every comment, and your stories keep this history alive. Back in the tower, Lieutenant Harris, head of communications, slammed his fist against the table. "We've lost him," he muttered. His assistant, pale and trembling, whispered, "Lost or gone off the map?" Because something strange was happening on their instruments. A faint echo signal appeared 30 miles north, then flickered out again. Another, closer but lower. Harris adjusted the dial, his pulse quickening. "That can't be right," he said softly. "That's too fast." "That's—" The light blinked once more. Then silence. An hour later, a distant rumble rolled across the desert. Men ran outside, shielding their eyes from the glare. There, cutting through the horizon, was a trail of white smoke, a contrail descending at an impossible angle. The bomber was coming down. Ellis gripped the yoke, fighting to steady the aircraft. The altimeter spun wildly. One of the engines coughed, sputtered, then died. The controls were heavy, unresponsive. He didn't know what had gone wrong, only that the plane had stopped behaving like a plane. It felt, pulled, as if something invisible had caught it mid-flight. The ground rushed toward him. The last thing he remembered before impact was a sharp metallic tearing, and the brief, haunting sound of wind rushing into a space it wasn't supposed to enter. The silver ghost struck the desert floor, skidding across dry earth before collapsing onto one wing. Fire erupted briefly, then vanished in a cloud of dust and silence. Within minutes, trucks surrounded the wreck. Paramedics rushed to the cockpit. When they pried it open, Captain Ellis was still breathing, barely. But what stunned them most wasn't his condition. It was what was missing. The fifth engine, the hidden power source buried deep in the fuselage, was gone. Night fell fast over Edwards Airfield. The wrecked bomber lay half-buried in dust, its broken wings casting jagged shadows under portable floodlights. The air smelled of oil, scorched paint, and desert wind. Around the perimeter, guards stood motionless, ordered not to speak. The few men allowed inside the cordon whispered the same question. What kind of engine leaves no trace? Captain Raymond Ellis woke in the infirmary hours later, his arm splinted, lungs bruised. The nurse told him he was lucky to be alive. He asked about the plane. She looked away. "They said it burned," she murmured. "There's nothing left." But Ellis knew the feel of a lie. He had seen the flash before he blacked out, a metallic glow, not fire but light, as if the heart of the machine had torn itself free. 2 colonels visited before dawn. They asked questions that didn't sound like Air Force questions. Did you notice any unusual vibration before the radio failure? Did anyone outside the test crew have access to the hangar? Ellis tried to answer, but his mind replayed the last seconds of flight, the sudden drag, the missing sound, the eerie stillness before impact. One of the colonels took notes on paper without a header. The other simply stared. When they left, his chart vanished from the foot of his bed. By sunrise, Hangar 12 was sealed. Armed MPs blocked every road. Technicians who'd spent months on the Silver Ghost found themselves reassigned to civilian research in Ohio, Utah, anywhere but here. Within 48 hours, it was as if the project had never existed. But one mechanic, Sergeant Lewis McCarthy, couldn't let it go. He'd installed the fuel lines himself. He knew how the fifth engine was mounted. When he sneaked back to the crash site 3 nights later, he found tire tracks, large, heavy double-axle, leading away from the wreck toward an auxiliary runway. At the end of that trail, the sand was scorched smooth like glass. Something powerful had lifted off from there after the crash. And it wasn't listed on any manifest. McCarthy tried to report it. The next morning his locker was emptied, his transfer orders waiting on the desk. Destination, Alaska. He left without another word. Meanwhile, Ellis was discharged quietly. No medals, no commendations. Just a handshake and a warning. For your own good, Captain, you were testing a standard prototype. Nothing more. He knew better. Yet every attempt to contact his old crew failed. Letters returned unopened. Calls redirected. Even the radio frequencies they'd used for flight tests were dead air. Weeks passed. The world's attention turned elsewhere, Berlin in ruins, Roosevelt gone, Truman sworn in, and a new weapon being prepared in the New Mexico desert. But rumors persisted. In the Pacific, pilots from the 509th Composite Group reported seeing an unfamiliar aircraft during night training near Okinawa. A large twin-boom silhouette, black as coal, flying faster than any B-29. They called it the Ghost Plane. Radar couldn't lock onto it. It appeared, shimmered, and vanished into cloud. In Washington, Analysts dismissed the reports as weather echoes or Japanese prototypes fleeing north. Yet one memo, later declassified only in fragments, contained a line scrawled in pencil. Profile matches recovered Lockheed test frame. Investigate Project Silver Ghost. No signature followed. Back in California, the hangar stood empty. The floor where the bomber once rested was scrubbed to bare concrete. A few loose bolts remained, marked for disposal. A young janitor found a fragment wedged behind a tool cabinet, a small triangular plate stamped with foreign lettering. He turned it over in his hand, puzzled. It wasn't English. It wasn't even American steel. The alloy was darker, heavier, slightly magnetic. When he handed it to his supervisor, the man's face drained of color. "Forget you saw that," he said. The fragment was never logged. Ellis returned to civilian life in silence. For years he kept a notebook, hand-drawn diagrams, equations half-remembered from the design briefings. He wanted to rebuild what they'd taken. Sometimes he woke at night, hearing the hum again, that unearthly vibration. He told his wife it was just a dream. But part of him knew the truth. Something inside that bomber wasn't mechanical at all. It behaved as if it knew when it was being watched. In 1946, an anonymous letter arrived at his home. No return address. Inside, a single photograph. Grainy, nighttime, taken from a distance. It showed what looked like the Silver Ghost lifting off a coastal runway. Painted entirely black, no insignia. In the background stood palm trees bent by ocean wind. Scribbled on the back were 3 words: Okinawa alive. Ellis stared at it for hours. He never told anyone. That same year, engineers at Wright Field unveiled sketches for a new generation of jet bombers. The XB-45 Tornado and the B-47 Stratojet. Both shared a strange resemblance to the lost prototype. Swept nacelles, buried engines, smooth fuselage. When asked about the design origins, officials simply said, post-war research. Nothing more. But in closed circles, whispers spread of a 5th engine that had changed everything. An experimental turbojet born from captured German technology, tested once in secret and never again. Some claimed it produced thrust far beyond the metallurgy of 1945. Others said it drew power differently, using heat rather than fuel. Whatever it was, it vanished with the Silver Ghost. By 1947, the Roswell incident drowned out all lesser mysteries. Files were buried deeper. Ellis died in 1952, officially from a heart condition. When his belongings were cataloged, the photograph was missing. Only one page of his notebook remained intact, stained with coffee and age. On it were 5 words written in tight script. It wanted to go home. Across the Pacific, maintenance crews on Okinawa continued to whisper. They said that on some nights, long after midnight, an aircraft unlike any other thundered over the water. No lights, no markings, only the roar of engines that didn't sound like engines at all. Locals called it the Silver Ghost of the sky. Investigators who revisited the Edwards records in later decades found discrepancies. A missing requisition form, an unexplained fuel allocation, photographs numbered out of sequence. One blurry image, dated April 1945, appeared to show a team loading an unpainted cylindrical object into a cargo bay. The manifest listed it simply as Auxiliary Power Unit Number 5. No one ever located that part again. For historians, the story ends there, a footnote, a rumor, an engineering myth lost among thousands. But for those who listen to the veterans' tales and the desert winds that still sweep through the old test fields, the question remains: what exactly did America build that spring, and where did it go when it vanished from the radar? The Silver Ghost had broken the barrier. What no one could prove was what lay beyond it. By the time summer of 1945 arrived, the world had turned its attention to a new and terrible invention, one that promised to end the war in a single flash of light. Newspapers screamed of atomic secrets and superweapons, but none mentioned the Silver Ghost. To most Americans, it never existed. To those who knew, silence was survival. In the shadows of the Pacific, the war was still raging. The skies above Okinawa were filled with smoke and steel. Pilots returning from missions began reporting strange phenomena: radar interference, sudden bursts of static, and on rare nights, a flicker of silver against the stars, moving faster than any known aircraft. It would appear, glide silently for seconds, then vanish. Most dismissed it as fatigue, illusions from the stress of combat. But a few airmen swore it was real. They said it looked American. And they said it shouldn't have been there. After the Japanese surrender in August, military logistics officers began clearing the island of surplus equipment. Among the inventory lists was a curious line item: Special Recon Craft, do not transfer. No description, no serial number. Just a weight estimate, roughly matching that of a medium bomber. Weeks later, that entry disappeared. The paperwork trail ended in Guam. Back home, Lockheed engineers who'd once walked those Mojave hangars were now designing post-war passenger planes. Yet sometimes, in interviews decades later, their eyes would darken at the mention of advanced propulsion tests. One retired metallurgist admitted under his breath, "We made something we didn't fully understand. And when it flew, it scared the hell out of us." Rumors grew with time. Some said the missing fifth engine had been spirited away to right field, becoming the core of an early jet program. Others whispered that it was loaded onto a naval carrier bound for the Pacific under top-secret escort. But the most chilling story came from a radar operator stationed in Hawaii who, years later, claimed he tracked an unidentified aircraft crossing from the west coast toward the Pacific at a sustained 500 miles per hour in 1945. The contact lasted 3 minutes before disappearing completely, as though swallowed by the ocean. For decades afterward, historians searching Air Force archives found fragments of information, requisitions for experimental alloys, memos referencing combined propulsion systems, and one note written in pencil: "Proceed with hybrid integration only under civilian designation." That single line suggested the Silver Ghost might have been reborn under another name. But which one? No one could say. When the Cold War began, jet bombers suddenly appeared. The XB-45, the B-47, then the B-52. Each leap in design seemed to arrive too fast, too perfect, as though the technology had skipped steps. One journalist asked a Boeing engineer how they achieved such aerodynamic efficiency so quickly after the war. He smiled faintly and said, "Sometimes history gives you a head start." By the 1950s, aviation had moved on. The men who once worked in the desert grew old, their tongues tied by oaths they never broke. The Silver Ghost became a myth, a ghost story told among test pilots and engineers who believed in things that flew faster than records could prove. But every myth carries a heartbeat of truth. In 1963, a research team conducting aerial photography over Nevada captured something unusual. On the edge of a dry lakebed near the old Edwards complex, a shape half buried in sand appeared in one frame. The next photo, taken seconds later, showed nothing. The film was developed, filed, and quietly forgotten. When one of the analysts revisited the archive years later, he found that the negatives from that roll were missing. What remained of Captain Raymond Ellis's legacy faded with time. His wife died in 1971. His children sold the family home. During renovation, workers found a small lockbox behind a false panel in the basement wall. Inside lay a single strip of metal, polished and engraved with the words Silver 1, April 1945. No one claimed ownership. The box was turned over to the local museum, which displayed it for years without context, just a nameless artifact from unknown aviation origins. And yet, each decade brought new sightings. Pilots training in the Mojave claimed to hear a strange echo on their headsets when flying near the old test site, a low hum, rising and falling, fading when approached. Engineers chalked it up to magnetic interference from the dry lake. But others said it was the sound of an engine that never stopped. The legend grew darker when declassified intelligence reports surfaced in the 1980s, revealing that fragments of a non-standard propulsion turbine were recovered in the Pacific in late 1945. The components were never identified as Japanese or American. Their metallurgy matched nothing produced during the war. The recovery log bore a red stamp, "Returned to originator." No one knew who that originator was. By then, the Silver Ghost had entered folklore. Aviation enthusiasts debated whether it was the prototype for America's jet bombers or something more, an experiment that crossed into the unknown. Some speculated the aircraft reached speeds that destabilized its structure, bending time perception for the pilot. Others believed the disappearance of the fifth engine was deliberate, a safeguard by those who built it to prevent its misuse. Each theory added another layer to the myth, but none could answer the question that haunted them all. Why erase a triumph so great it could have rewritten history? In the early 2000s, a group of researchers combing through digitized military microfilm stumbled upon an unmarked folder. Inside was a memo dated April 22, 1945, signed only with initials. It read, Silver unit recovered. Heart extracted. Prepare Phase 2 deployment overseas. Ensure all references buried. Beneath the signature, a single word was typed: Okinawa. The document was quickly removed from public access. Within months, the entire microfilm reel was reclassified. Modern historians now refer to the Silver Ghost as the bomber that never was. But among veterans and their descendants, the story refuses to die. Some still write to museums, claiming their fathers saw the plane. Others send photos, faded, grainy, taken on airstrips long reclaimed by desert. In each image, somewhere near the edge of the frame, there's always a blur, a glint of light, a streak of motion that shouldn't be there. One theory suggests that after the war, remnants of the Silver Ghost were integrated into the X-plane program. The experimental series that led to Chuck Yeager's Bell X-1 breaking the sound barrier in 1947. The timing fits. The technology leap fits. But officially, no link has ever been acknowledged. If true, then the Ghost's legacy didn't vanish. It simply changed its name and kept flying under different skies. Even now, deep in the archives of aerospace history, files remain sealed, labeled only propulsion anomalies, 1945 to 46. They sit in boxes untouched, waiting for someone to ask the right question. And maybe that's why this story still matters. Because every generation needs its legends, and every legend hides a truth waiting to be rediscovered. For those who stand today on the hot concrete of Edwards Airfield, the ghosts still whisper. When the desert wind rises just right, and the last light of sunset hits the horizon, pilots say you can almost see it, a silver shape gliding silently across the sky, faster than thought, fading before your eyes. No one ever catches it. No one ever records it. But everyone who sees it agrees on one thing. It doesn't move like anything built by human hands. Maybe it was just a prototype lost to time. Or maybe, on that April morning in 1945, America unlocked something it wasn't ready to control. Something that broke free. Something that still circles above us, waiting for the world to understand what it truly was. And that's the mystery of the Silver Ghost, the U.S. bomber that broke every rule of speed and disappeared into history. Some say it was buried under new names. Others believe it still flies, hidden among the stars of America's secret projects. But the truth? It's somewhere between the clouds and the classified. If stories like this fascinate you, the forgotten blueprints, the brave men who flew into the unknown, then don't let them vanish again. Please share this video with someone who loves aviation history, hit that like button, and make sure to subscribe to WWII Frontline Legends for more untold stories that history tried to erase. And tell us where you're watching from around the world. We read every single comment, and your support keeps these legends alive. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies, because some legends never really land.